I was 10 years old and hiding behind the drapes at Merivale Court when I saw a scullery maid silence a baroness. And I have spent the 60 years since trying to describe it properly to people who were not there, always feeling, by the end, that I have somehow made it smaller than it was. My mother had brought me to the New Year's Eve ball against my father's better judgment, on the grounds that a girl ought to see one proper grown-up party before she was made to endure years of dull ones, and I had been installed behind the heavy velvet curtain at the ballroom's far end, with strict instructions to stay out of the way and go to sleep on the window seat if I grew tired. I had no intention of sleeping. I had never seen anything like Merivale Court at Christmas. The great fir garlands looped along the gallery, the candles in every sconce. 200 guests in their finest turned gold and glittering under the chandeliers, and I meant to watch every minute of it. We were not, ourselves, especially grand people. My father managed the Merivale Estates home farm, which earned us an invitation to the New Year's ball, but never quite the standing to be seated anywhere but the outer edges of it. And I think that particular position, half inside the party and half not, is precisely what let me see the whole evening so clearly. I was near enough to hear everything, and far enough to matter to no one, which is, I have come to believe, the very best vantage a child can be given. From my curtain I watched the dancing begin at 9, watched old Colonel Petrie fall asleep upright in a wing chair by 10, watched 3 separate engagements be quietly negotiated in the alcoves by 10:30, in the particular hushed, urgent way grown-ups negotiate things they hope no one is watching. I was wrong, in every case, that no one was watching. The ballroom itself I can still see clearly whenever I close my eyes. The long gallery of family portraits looking down the length of it, a fire the size of a small carriage roaring at either end. The great Bosendorfer standing closed and unused near the French doors, because the hired quartet had been engaged to play from the little raised platform beside it instead. Footmen moved through the crowd with trays of champagne that caught the candlelight every time they turned, and somewhere beneath all of it, very faint, I remember the particular good smell of a house that has been baking and roasting since dawn for 200 guests. The trouble began at 11:30, with barely enough time left before midnight to matter, when word came down from the drive that the hired quartet from town, violins, cello, and the pianist who was meant to lead them, had abandoned their carriage 2 miles off in a snowdrift and were, at that very moment, being fetched home by lantern rather than delivered to play. Mrs. Merivale, our hostess, went the particular shade of pale that hostesses go when a party's whole shape is about to collapse in front of 200 witnesses. There would be no music for the midnight dance. There would be no music, indeed, for anything at all. It was Lady Cordelia Strand who filled that silence, because Lady Cordelia Strand filled every silence she was ever given the chance to fill, and rarely with anything kind. "Surely," she said, loudly enough to carry to the gallery, turning her wine glass slowly by its stem, "one of the staff can bang out a tune on that piano. I've heard the scullery girl humming over the pots half the afternoon, loudly enough that we could hear her from the dining room with the doors shut. Fetch her up. If she can carry a tune well enough to annoy a house full of guests without meaning to, she can certainly manage Auld Lang Syne." There was laughter, the particular laughter of people relieved to have been handed permission to laugh at someone who cannot answer back. I remember my mother's mouth tightening in the way it did when she disapproved of something she had decided not to say aloud. I remember thinking, with the pure, unclouded cruelty of a child who does not yet understand what a scullery is, that this seemed a very exciting turn of events, and craning further round the curtain to see. A young man near the punch bowl, one of the visiting nephews down from Oxford, laughed loudest of all, and said something to his companion about the entertainment finally arriving, and I remember, even then, disliking him for it, in the simple, absolute way children dislike people without needing reasons. The girl who was brought up from below stairs could not have been much past 20, in her work dress with a scullery apron still tied at her waist, her hands red from whatever she had been scrubbing when the summons came. Hetty, the housekeeper called her, and I remember the housekeeper's face doing something complicated, embarrassment. I understood only much later, mixed with something that might have been pride, held very carefully in check. Lady Cordelia looked Hetty over, with the particular thoroughness of a woman conducting an inspection she has already decided the outcome of. Well, do you know Auld Lang Syne, girl? Or must we all simply hum it ourselves at midnight like a house full of fools? I know it, my lady, Hetty said. Her voice did not shake at all, which I remember finding remarkable even at 10 years old, watching a room full of finely dressed strangers waiting to see her fail. Then play it, Lady Cordelia said. And anything else you happen to know that won't embarrass the house too badly. Small mercies. I want to tell you that Hetty hesitated, or trembled, or did any of the things a story like this is supposed to have its heroine do, but she did not. She walked to the piano, Merivale Court's great Bosendorfer, gleaming under the chandeliers, dressed for the season with a garland of holly along its closed lid, an instrument I am quite sure she had never once been permitted to touch in 3 years of service, untied her scullery apron without any particular hurry, folded it over the bench's edge, and sat down. She did not look at Lady Cordelia, or at the assembled guests, or at the squire. She looked, for one long moment, only at the keys themselves, the way a traveler looks at a house she left as a girl, and has not been permitted to enter since. What none of the guests knew, and what I did not learn myself until my mother finally told me the whole of it years later, was that Hetty Coram's late father had once been Merivale Court's own piano master, and had been, moreover, my own mother's teacher as a girl, which is precisely how I came to have the whole story told to me so completely and with such care once I was old enough to be trusted with it. Mr. Coram had taught 3 generations of Merivale children their scales in the very music room 2 floors above that ballroom, until a fire in the east wing, laid, as such things so often are, to careless candles rather than any fault of his, destroyed a wing of irreplaceable manuscripts under his care, and though no inquiry ever found him responsible, the old Squire Merivale had let him go rather than keep, as he put it, a reminder of the loss in the house. My mother told me she had wept, as a girl of 12, when Mr. Coram left, and had never quite forgiven the household she herself would one day marry into for the manner of his going. Coram had died within 3 years of losing the position, of what the parish register recorded only as a wasting grief, leaving a widow and a daughter of 17 who took, within the month, the only position Merivale Court would still offer a piano master's child, scullery maid, the lowest post in the house that had once paid her father to teach its heirs Chopin. Hetty had come to the position, my mother said, not out of any strategy or hidden hope, but simply because there was nowhere else in the county that would have her, and because pride, when a widowed mother is hungry, is a luxury quickly set aside. She had scrubbed pots in the kitchen where her father's former pupils dined 2 floors above her for 3 years, and had never once, in all that time, let slip to a single soul in that house who her father had been. The cook, my mother said, had remarked once or twice on the girl's oddly careful hands with delicate china, and thought no more of it than that she was simply a tidy worker, never once suspecting those same hands had once been praised, in that very house, for their touch on a keyboard. Hetty had not touched a piano since. Not, that is, until Lady Cordelia's joke handed her one in front of 200 witnesses. My mother told me, years afterward, that in the whole 3 years of her service at Merivale Court, Hetty had never once so much as lingered near the music-room door, when her duties took her past it, a discipline my mother called, with real feeling, a kind of grief I hope you never have cause to practice. She began, as commanded, with Auld Lang Syne, a plain, unadorned version, the melody alone, the kind of playing that gives away nothing and asks for nothing, the playing of a woman testing whether her hands remembered what her heart had spent 4 years trying to forget. I saw Lady Cordelia's mouth curl into the beginning of a satisfied smile, the smile of a woman whose joke has landed exactly where she intended it. And then Hetty did not stop. The old song dissolved, note by note, into something else entirely, a cascade of arpeggios that seemed to fall and catch, and fall again like water, finding its own level, glittering runs that chased each other up and down the keyboard, with a lightness that made the great instrument sound, impossibly, like something smaller and more delicate than itself. I did not know, at 10, that what I was hearing was Ravel's Jeux d'eau, Games of Water, my mother told me years later. a piece meant to sound exactly like fountains catching light. But I knew, the way children know things before they have words for them, that the sound in that ballroom had stopped being a servant's party trick and become something none of us had any right to witness for free. The laughter in the room did not stop all at once. It thinned, guest by guest, as heads turned toward the piano one by one, the way a field of grass turns when the wind changes. Mrs. Merivale had both hands pressed to her mouth. The squire, standing near the great fireplace, had gone very still, and I saw, because I was watching everything that night with the merciless attention only children give to adults behaving strangely, a look cross his face that I would now call recognition, the look of a man hearing, faintly, underneath a daughter's playing, the ghost of a teacher he had wronged. The Oxford nephew who had laughed loudest at the punch bowl had gone entirely silent, his glass halfway to his lips and forgotten there. The piece runs and glitters, and never once sits still, demanding hands quick enough to keep a dozen separate streams of sound falling at once, without ever muddying into noise. And Hetty's hands did not falter, not once, through passages that made the two elderly ladies nearest the piano, regular subscribers, I learned later, to the London concert season, exchange a look I did not understand until I was old enough to attend concerts myself. There is a passage near the piece's heart, where the water seems to gather itself into one great cascading wave, before scattering again into individual droplets of sound. And I remember, even as a child with no training in anything, feeling my own breath catch at exactly the moment the whole room's did. I remember, too, the particular stillness of Hetty's face throughout. Not the strained concentration I might have expected from a scullery maid attempting something so plainly beyond her station, but something closer to relief, the expression of a person setting down, after 4 years, a weight she had carried so long she had stopped noticing its full size until the moment it finally left her hands. The dancing couples who had paired off for what was meant to be the midnight waltz stood frozen mid-step, still holding each other, quite forgetting to dance at all. Lady Cordelia's satisfied smile had gone somewhere else entirely by then. I watched it happen from behind my curtain, with the particular fascination of a child witnessing an adult's face fail to do what an adult's face is supposed to do. She had gone quite pale, her wineglass forgotten, and tilting dangerously in her hand, watching a scullery maid do something at that piano that Lady Cordelia herself, for all her fine education, plainly could never have done. The piece ends the way its title promises, not with a grand crashing finish, but with the water simply, gradually, settling, the runs growing softer and further apart, until the very last notes seem to fall like the final few drops after a fountain has been switched off. And when Hetty lifted her hands from the keys, the ballroom held a silence so complete I heard the grandfather clock in the hall beginning, somewhere beyond the doors, to wind itself up toward striking midnight. Nobody moved. I do not think, in 60 years since, I have ever again witnessed 200 people simultaneously unsure what they had just given themselves permission to feel. Even the footmen by the doors, who had seen every manner of guest behavior over the years, and prided themselves on never once looking surprised, stood with their trays forgotten at their sides. It was the squire who broke it, crossing the ballroom floor in front of every one of his guests, and stopping before the piano bench, the way a man stops before something he has waited 4 years, without quite admitting it to himself, to see put right. "Miss Coram," he said, and I understood even then that using her surname, in front of that whole room, was itself a kind of public reckoning. "Your father was the finest teacher this house ever employed, and I have carried the shame of how we parted with him longer than I have let myself say aloud. I hope you will allow me, tonight, to begin to put that right." Lady Cordelia did not say anything at all. She set down her wineglass, very quietly, on the nearest table, and I noticed, child that I was, missing nothing, that her hands were not quite steady. The clock struck midnight into that silence, and rather than Auld Lang Syne, sung awkwardly a cappella by 200 guests who had forgotten they meant to dance to it, Hetty played it again herself, properly this time, full and warm, and the whole ballroom joined its voices to her hands for the turning of the year. Guests and, I noticed, 3 housemaids who had crept up to the gallery rail to listen, none of them sent away. Squire Merivale funded, within the month, a proper conservatory place for Hetty in London, and saw to it, I am told, that the arrangement was made in her father's name as much as her own. A small plaque in the Merivale Court music room, still there the last time I visited, reading simply, "In memory of a teacher this house was slow to honor." He also, my mother told me, quietly settled a pension on Hetty's mother, the widow Coram, who lived out her remaining years in a cottage on the estate, rather than the almshouse she had resigned herself to, and who was, I am told, in the front row of the small London recital hall the night her daughter first played for a paying audience. Hetty herself, I am glad to tell you, returned to Merivale Court every New Year's Eve, for as long as old Mrs. Merivale lived, to play exactly the piece she had played that first night, standing ovation and all. And Lady Cordelia Strand, so far as anyone at Merivale Court could ever afterward recall, never once made a joke at a servant's expense again in that house, or, I am told, in any other. She wrote Hetty a letter the following week, my mother said, which Hetty kept for the rest of her life folded inside her copy of the Ravel score. I do not know what it said, and Hetty was never persuaded to share it, but she kept it, which seems answer enough. I am an old woman myself now, considerably older than any of the guests I watched that night from behind the curtain, and I have been to a great many concerts in the years since, in halls considerably grander than a country ballroom. I have never once heard anything that moved me the way Hetty Coram's hands did that New Year's Eve, playing a piano she had been forbidden to touch for 4 years, in front of 200 people who had gathered only to hear her fail. I think of it every New Year, when the clock begins its long climb toward midnight, and I am glad, still, that I did not fall asleep on that window seat as I had been told to.